Hello, my name is Michael Wytock, and I am a senior consultant with Stride Consulting. And this talk is about how we can make our infrastructure code maintainable and resistant to changes and support those changes. And oftentimes, when we're writing code of any kind, the way we learn how to write maintainable code is by writing a lot of unmaintainable code and then getting bitten by it. What my teammates have taught me over the last few months of working with them is a mechanism for how we can use modules and versioning, two fundamental skills, to make our code more maintainable. So it makes sense to talk a little bit about why our infrastructure may be changing in the first place. And it usually comes down to changing requirements. But there's a couple of high-level things that are shared across many organizations. Perhaps you need to support a new deployment context. There's going to be a bare metal context that we've never supported before. Maybe you have a multi-cloud situation, or you have client-specific deployments that will occur, and you need to make sure you can deploy to these new requirements that are unforeseen right now. And it's more complicated because you may have some of these particular requirements of your infrastructure code. You may want automated tests. You want it to build in CI. You want portable code as well. So the first suggestion is that you split modules based on your build. So obey the build, don't work against it. Take your networking code, which would be required for our machines to be able to speak to one another, and make that its own module. Then, for the configuration for those machines, make that a module as well. And then finally, the services that will be deployed in there, those services need to be placed into their own module. These dependencies being modeled here will provide a common abstraction that you'll be able to use across all of your deployment contexts in the future. So if you're using Terraform, oftentimes the outputs of one of these build modules, we'll call them, will be fed into the next module. So in your networking module where you have your VPC set up and subnets, the outputs of that information will flow into the compute layer, and then after you've done your provisioning, perhaps you're provisioning Kubernetes, something else, then you'll have all the outputs there ready to deploy services into it. And this is an example of how we can use this to achieve phased deployments. So in your development environment, if you have some kind of error going on in your services module, then we can fix that error, make sure we address the failing tests before promoting into production. And similarly, if we have a brand new deployment context, we can isolate and understand changes in these different build modules and talk about them using the same terminologies we've used before. Now, the second strategy that we've used is to create a separate child modules repository. And in this separate repository, we can place things like the finer-grained VPC configuration, or maybe your authentication tooling. And when we place them all in this separate repository together, now we're able to reference them and consume them through all of our separate build modules that are in separate pipelines for our deployments. So, for example, in this development pipeline that we have, we may see that there's a failure, again, in our services module, and we're referencing certain child modules that are under development, and we need to fix those before we can merge back into master. And let's say we do fix those, and we're now at v1.24 in this development environment, and we want to push that out into production. We've now run tests in development. We've seen it running alongside other services, and we can bump our references. And hopefully, it's as simple as that, for the most part, in moving from development to production. Maybe you have a separate cloud account that you're going to be deploying into and small configuration changes, but it's not much more than that. Now, if you have a brand new deployment context, and you have new functionality that you haven't put into your system yet, then we'll bump again, we'll add those specialized modules, and perhaps change the configuration more dramatically in the build modules, but still just consume that new bumped version of the child modules. So to summarize, obey the build, don't work against it, use that to guide your organization, and keep it consistent across all of your build pipelines. Decouple by placing your child modules off on their own in their own repository, and version them. Make sure that you can reference those versions, and use that to specialize your new deployment contexts that you may not have been able to foresee as of yet. And then finally, I'd like to offer some acknowledgments and thank especially the team that I work with on a day-to-day basis, especially Adar Shah and Ariel Sullivan. Thank you.